Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. This will be a much easier talk. And I'm going to look at the why and the how. And I think it's very important that we, as Christians, we approach education through a biblical worldview. It helps us, it gives us hope, it gives us encouragement, and it also sets the framework for the way we teach. So all wisdom, understanding, instruction, knowledge, and truth begin with our knowledge of God and His world. And He is the one from whom wisdom flows. So that is our source of wisdom, and it's to Him that we go, and it's to His word that we go to help us. So I'm just going to read a few scriptures to encourage us in this journey. So 2 Peter chapter 1 verse 3, His divine power has granted to us all things that pertain to life and godliness, through the knowledge of Him who called us to His own glory and excellence. So God has given us everything we need to raise our children and to walk with Him in this world. Proverbs chapter 23 verse 23, by truth and do not sell it, by wisdom, instruction, and understanding. So we pursue truth. We need to. God wants us to. It's not a passive thing that we do. Proverbs 24 verses 3 to 4, by wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established. By knowledge the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches. And knowledge is a gift. Wisdom is a gift. And it draws us nearer to God because we understand Him better, we understand each other better, and we know His world. So we look at some of the characters in Scripture. Particularly, I want to speak about Solomon. So 1 Kings 4 verses 29 to 34, we read, And God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure, and breadth of mind like the sand on the seashore. So we do not want to be narrow-minded. So that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the East and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all other men, wiser than Ethan and Ezrahite and Herman, Calcol and Dada, the sons of Mahol, and his fame was in all the surrounding nations. He also spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. He spoke of trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. He spoke also of beasts and of birds and of reptiles and of fish. So he had a very broad education. When we learn about God's world, we are discovering something that is already there, and we begin to think God's thoughts after Him. And all people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. So now, how do we respond to this? We live in an age of distraction. There's technology, there's social media, there's AI. We're just bombarded with information day in and day out. There's very little absolute truth or objective truth in our world today. Rather, it's subjective truth based on self and feelings, the search of identity. So it's shifted dramatically, the pursuit of truth in our world today. And because of this, because of the world we're living in, we begin to raise our children, we become fearful. We think, how are they going to cope in this world? How are they going to survive in this world? How are they not going to be misled in this world? So we become anxious, but we needn't be so. When we are anxious for our children, we cast our burden on Jesus because He is our burden bearer, and He knows what we struggle with. He knows our weaknesses. He knows our limitations. So we go to Him. He cares for us, and He will give us a peace that will guard our hearts. He is the Prince of Peace, and He will give us peace. So we need to be humble. We need to be very dependent on God for our walk in this journey of education and raising our children. So with this, let's look at the life of Daniel, because we find Daniel in a very in a situation I would imagine is very similar to our worldviews today. So in Daniel chapter 1, verse 1 and onwards, we read, In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. So when we look at this particular passage, and Sal and I were discussing it, so these young men were probably from 14 up, around about there, 14 to 18 or so. They already had a bedrock of education from their parents and from their worldview, their culture, their religion. So they had understanding, they had wisdom, they had knowledge because they had God. But now they are commanded to be taught the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years. And at the end of their time, they were to stand before the king. So then they would do oral examinations before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar, Hananiah he called Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, and Azariah he called Abednego. Now as for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. At the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them none were found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all the kingdom. And Daniel was there until the 1st year of King Cyrus. So the Chaldean language that they were required, which was the context, the Chaldean language and literature that they were required to study, contained within their culture, practice, and worldview, contained worldviews of the enchanters, sorcerers, astrologists. It was a polytheistic culture. They studied myths and mathematics, and their literature consisted of Enum or Elish, their own creation story, and the Epic of Gilgamesh, a Noah-like story. So they were immersed for 3 years in this Chaldean worldview that was contrary to their own. But Daniel retained his faith in God, and he never compromised. He was already educated, and it formed the bedrock of his learning. So therefore, when we become anxious about the world that our children are in, we trust the Lord for the time in which they are born. God knows them, and they are born for a time such as this. We have no control about when we are born, where we are born, where we live, when we are born, but God knows, and we entrust him with this, that they will be able to cope within the society that they live without removing themselves from the society and being ineffective in that society. The important thing is that we raise our children in Christ and we begin to dialogue with them about these issues. So we look at, in our particular time, we face some really serious issues. We look at the belief systems of our day, such as evolution, the right to life, whether it's unborn, aged, or terminally ill. We have gender issues, marriage, culture, the Israel-Gaza conflict. We have world politics and conflict. We have outbreaks of viruses. We have a migrant issue, we have Islam, we have technology, and so on. And we need to engage our children on these topics when they ask questions. We cannot hide them from it. We need to, from a biblical worldview, begin to say, so what does God say? How do we respond to this? So we can do this through the lens of Scripture, which is marvelous. And these are the realities of our world. And you will be amazed at how aware our children are of these issues. So remember, our children are with us all the time. We talk, we think they're not listening. They are, they hear things, and then they're thinking about these things. And they need to be able to come to you without condemnation to be able to discuss these things. So clearly, we need to be discerning. So when we begin to deal with topics like evolution or abortion, we need to be sensitive to age maturity when we teach it, how we teach it. But we gradually begin to walk this journey with our kids. So another great way when our children are smaller in introducing these topics is to do it through stories. There are amazing books out there that are based in a story form, in a narrative, where children will begin to be exposed to cultures that are different to theirs, people who are facing different things, and they can begin to engage with it in a way that they can when they're younger. So now we're going to look at the how, and that's the fun part. And I'm going to draw quite a bit from the Charlotte Mason philosophy. So when I started homeschooling back then in South Africa, it was very new. Obviously, in 1994, it became legal. And there was very little available then in South Africa. So we had the Charlotte Mason worldview philosophy was predominant among the homeschoolers at the time. And we had Konos, we had Matthew C., pretty much. Lateral. That was the curriculum that was available at the time. So I want us to look at three things, aspects and areas that influence the how. How do we do this? So there are three areas that we want to influence: the head, the hands, and the heart. So the head part of our education has to do with ideas, with knowledge, and with truth. So when we begin to discuss things, we're actually engaging with ideas, and those ideas become part of a culture, part of a worldview, part of a belief system. So we like to engage with primary sources. So that means it's not a textbook source. So when we engage, say we're dealing with history, for example, we would try and read a primary source from the person who was involved at that time. The trouble with textbooks are that they are redacted. They are just reduced, and you have this person who's writing the textbook or putting it together is bringing their point of view across. But when you're engaging with, say you're dealing with the story like the Battle of Blood River, for example, and you're reading from the aspect from the different people groups that were involved. So you're not just reading it from your culture, from your point of view, but you're reading it from all points of view. And there are beautiful literature books out there that teach children this way. So we want them to gain knowledge. So you have information and you have knowledge. It's not quite the same thing. We are inundated with information. And we need to train our children to be able to discern whether that information is true or false. So it requires a certain skill. Knowledge is a different thing. We have a knowledge of God. It's based on a relationship. It's a knowing. And then we deal with truth. So that is always our barometer. That's always our standard. We will compare whatever we're looking at to truth. Then we look at the part in our children's lives and our own is hands. So we want them to learn practical skills. We want to teach them chores so they become responsible in the care of their own homes, themselves. We teach them cooking, gardening, because they're all going to have a home one day that they need to take care of. We look at artisanal and vocational skills. Maybe a child is very interested to, learn welding or something. We can introduce those kinds of things at quite a young age. And there's the whole area of art and design. So practical application of what we learn is very important. Children learn through their 5 senses, so we engage them in their 5 senses. It's not just about listening to a teacher all day or reading volumes of pages of text. They can learn using all their senses. Then we have the part of their schooling or their lives is their heart. This is very important because here we shepherd them and we point them to Scripture and we raise them up for a love of the Word and for God. So that is, so we shepherd them, we set an example in our own lives, how we walk with the Lord, and we also want to build character. And as we all know, character is often built through adversity. So when our children are struggling with their maths, they must persevere. It's adversity for them. They don't want to do it. But you want them to develop character. When they have limitations in their own lives or their circumstances, we walk with them because we want the adversity to build them and not to crush them. We want to teach good habits. So habit formation is very important because it just makes for smooth living. So when you develop certain habits, it becomes automatic. You're not even thinking about it, but it makes your life easier. So if you get up in the morning and you make your bed, it's done. You're not even thinking about it anymore. You're washing your dishes or whatever the case may be. Or after you've done your school activities, you've packed away, you're ready for the next day. So we build good habits. And the heart component is, of course, has to do with relationships. So the first place for building relationships is within the family. People often say that children are not socialized in a homeschool setting, but your socialization begins with your family and it goes into your community. So you take it in, you begin there, but you don't stay there. It equips your children to cope in social situations when they move out, when they are dealing with adults or children outside their home. And the wonderful thing that can happen for a child in a homeschool setting is the ability to engage multi-generationally. Because you find in a school that a child will find he's in a particular grade, so most of his time is spent with that age group. He's not engaging across with older, younger, his own age. And you'll often find that homeschool children are very good with younger children. They're not, it's not all this like, what are you doing with that young kid when you're at school? It's just a whole different dynamic. So relationship building is an important part. Now, how we view children is also very important. Children are born persons, and they are made in the image of God. Love and respect them. Remember, educating your child and disciplining him will not save him. Salvation is through Christ alone, and we need to keep that in mind. It's not, I think often we put too much store in home education. We think it's going to do all kinds of things, but it doesn't. Christ is the one who saves. But in our continual pointing and directing and nurturing our children, our hope and praying for them is that they will come to know Christ. Education should be child-centered, not curriculum or grade-driven. Curriculum is your servant, not your master, and I think this is very important to learn this. Because we're fearful as homeschoolers, because we're used to being in school, or this is all we're accustomed to, we think we have this math curriculum and we have to do it regardless. And we have to finish it by the end of the year, and we get ourselves into a big state when we can't. And I promise you, teachers don't finish their curriculum. It's almost impossible. And some of the curriculum may not be relevant to your child. It may not be necessary. They may move very quickly through some things. They may just not be interested. So really don't set your hope in expensive curriculum and think that's going to be your answer. You're the teacher. You know your child. And that's also a huge blessing, because in a school situation, it's very difficult for teachers to get to know the children. There are just so many. Don't specialize too soon on your road of rather give a broad education. We want our children, I don't know if you've, in spite of social media, children actually have a very poor general knowledge. Because social media is used just for communicating pretty much, their general knowledge is very poor. So by giving a broad education, you create interesting children who have interests for a lot of things, and obviously they're going to find a bent and a direction which you can nurture, but never at the expense of the broad education. That must always be in place. So regardless of the style your child learns in, don't just teach in that style. Teach in all styles, and then you shore up the difficulties that a child has in certain ways of learning, and you take advantage of their strengths to drive their education, but don't neglect one for the other. Then how you view yourself as parents or teachers is very important. Our function in their lives, what is it? Remember, your identity is in Christ, not your child. If you put it in your child, you're going to create tremendous burden for that child. It's in Christ. You mustn't think that people are going to judge you according to how clever your child is or how well they're doing. Your identity is in Christ. Learning and growing is a lifelong pursuit. We as adults learn very often when you homeschool, you learn alongside your child, and you realize how many gaps you've got. So if we have this attitude or this mindset of lifelong learning, we will continue to learn until the day we die, and that's a wonderful thing. We learn alongside our children, and it's important for you to grow in your knowledge, in your education, because once your children become teens, you don't want to be a boring mother who knows nothing. Your children, you need to be able to engage with your children and be relevant, know what's going on in the world, be able to have conversations with them. All those things I mentioned to you earlier about evolution and marriage and gender and Israel and Gaza and American politics. We discuss these things all the time. Ben will come to me, Mom, did you read this latest thing about what's going on with the coalition government or whatever? So we discuss these things all the time. So you as a mother, you need to stay, you must remain having an attitude of growing yourself. If you lack a particular skill in teaching your children or you feel inadequate, then do a course and improve your ability in that space. So one of the subjects I love is maths. I have none of my children have come alongside of me with that one, but I love maths. So, and maths, obviously with my age, I learned a particular style of mathematics. We did pure maths, and I've seen how maths has changed over the years, and I've seen tremendous gaps in the way that maths is taught, and I see our children are struggling today, and just putting the cart before the horse. But there's also a lovely part of maths that has changed it's called a growth mindset, which I really enjoy. So I did a course with Stanford University with Joe Bowler, and I studied the whole mathematical mindset, where we talk about maths, we build maths, we draw maths, we write maths, and it's marvelous, especially with the younger children. So it engages them because it becomes very interesting. So anywhere you have gaps, try and do courses. If you seriously have gaps or just cannot, then get a tutor. That's fine. There's no problem with that. If you can hire a tutor, especially when they get older, and you're dealing with calculus and trig or geometry or whatever, anything, I just can't do this, then you just get a tutor. But there's also wonderful opportunities online. There's many online courses when they're older. So I would discourage online learning with younger children. It's very monotonous and very boring. They need, like I said, they need to engage with their five senses. They learn better that way. So try and avoid it as much as you can. Once they're into higher high school, it's fine to a point. So now the atmosphere of your home is very important. So you are on the hook. Your children are with you day and night. So you have a tremendous influence on your children. They don't need a grumpy, moany, miserable mother. So your home needs to be a place of truth and beauty and goodness. It needs to be peaceful, and I know it's not always peaceful, but this is what we're aiming for. Children will develop a love of learning by watching you. If you're not interested, they will not be interested. If you don't have a sense of curiosity or desire to learn or grow, they won't. So your example plays a tremendous role in the life of your children when you teach them. Are you calm most of the time? Are you joyful? Are you hopeful? Are you kind? Are you curious? Are you patient? And it's very important that you're willing to own up to your own mistakes. We need to apologize to our children when we mess up. So one of the things when I teach my children maths, and honestly you wing it much of the time, because when you're a maths teacher, you're immersed in mathematics from morning to night. You're teaching these children for the last 10 years. You've been teaching them the same concept, so you know it. When you homeschool, you're not immersed to that extent. So I do maths with them, and I'll say to them, if I've made a mistake, tell me. So you don't be proud and think, no, because I promise you make mistakes, you'll get your numbers mixed up and you'll do silly things. So I work on a board with them and I say, tell me if I've made a mistake. So you need to be humble, you need to be working with them. Also, allow your children to make mistakes. They will, and it's not a place of shame. Mistakes help you grow. When you make a mistake and you do it right, you'll remember it because you know what you did wrong and now you've done it. So you never shame your children for your mistakes. Some children will learn faster than others. Some will really struggle with certain concepts. Don't get annoyed with them. And I've told you this 50 times now. Why can't you get it in your head? You need to be patient. Children are different. You need to walk with them. So in this incredible task of being watched all the time, each day is a new day, and we walk humbly with our God as He refines us in the process of raising our children and teaching them. He is in the process of changing our hearts through the disciplining or discipling and education of our children. So when we create an atmosphere for our home, for our children to learn in, because that's the space they're in all the time, it's not about having all the best things or a lot of money. It's about having order and functionality in your home. So work will create a mess. I think there's a scripture in about the oxen in the Bible, it talks about an empty stall. It's clean, but when you're working, you're going to create a mess, and that's wonderful. Especially if you do art. If you do art, it makes a tremendous amount of mess. That's not the issue. We want to work and we want to allow them, because I think so many times children are scared to do anything because they're not allowed to mess. But once you've messed, you clean up. So then we bring back order, we bring back an environment, the classroom or your room or whatever is ready for the next task. So another thing that's important in this space is to display work. So children need to be seen. They need to see that you see what they've done, you appreciate what they've done, you want everybody to see it, so we display work. So we do a lot of that. We also display, I have book stands, and we study artists, we do art appreciation, so if you're studying Monet, I will have an art book of Monet up, and we will look at his art for a week and then look at another piece of art. We will display cookery books. My children are looking at what's the latest recipe. Cookery books are beautiful. They should never be in a closed shelf all the time. So we have them up, and look how they made that. So we do this. We display books. So books are a very important part of our schooling. It is very important to teach from a position of rest. We walk with God in our salvation from a position of rest because Christ has done it all. So when we walk with our children, we teach from a position of rest. In Christ, we do not teach from fear. We do not teach from anxiety. We teach from rest. raising children and teaching them requires a long faithfulness. This is a long journey, and very much you're in the thick of the battle, and you lose sight of the end of the journey because it can be really hard sometimes. We must not grow weary and faint. We must persevere. So now we'll look at some tools, and that's really exciting today. There is so much available now. It's just amazing what resources are available. It can also be very overwhelming because you think, if I don't have that, then I can't give my child a proper education. So these are the tools I know and have used. There's much more out there, but I don't know them or have not used them. So for me, the primary source has been Charlotte Mason, and there's a free curricular guide, Ambleside online, and Charlotte Mason is literature based. So that is my primary way of teaching, is through literature. I love story. Truth is embedded in story. In story, children build relationships with the characters. They are spurred on when they see courageous acts in these characters, so they build relationships with these stories, and they retain what they've learned, because it's not didactic, it's not just information, it's embedded in real life. Footprints by Wendy and Shirley. I don't know if any of you know the Footprints curriculum. So Shirley and Wendy took the Charlotte Mason philosophy and applied it to a South African context, and it's based on South African history and geography. It's all story. She has little footprints, and then for the older kids, it's beautiful. And they spent a lot of time compiling this. So they were part of the scene back in the day. I used to go to Wendy's workshops when she first started teaching about Charlotte Mason. And they've revised their work. Obviously, they're very sensitive to the history of South Africa, and where they felt they had misunderstood, they've revised it. So it's a very broad history education for South African children from every point of view, from every cultural point of view, which is really lovely. You know, people will often say, oh, is this a Christian curriculum? Or, you know, curriculum is generally, it's the person that is a Christian, and it's their worldview that is reflected through what they learn, whether it's maths or science or language or whatever. Then there's 5 in a Row. I don't know if any of you know 5 in a Row. It's beautiful. It was back in the day. It's a literature-based American curricula, but it's not American as such. It's global stories that children learn from. Classical education, Susan Wise-Bauer. I don't know if any of you know her. I have looked at classical education extensively. It runs very closely to your Charlotte Mason view. It's more rigorous. It's quite academic, but there's a lot you can draw from it. I have all her Well-Trained Mind books, so she would put the concepts of classical education in these books, and then they're lovely because they will cover different subjects, and you can just draw from those for ideas. So she's done new editions just about every second year, bringing in new curriculum, not the core of what she's saying, but because there's new access to new information curricula. So she does a beautiful history curriculum called Story of the World. It's beautiful. So it's story based. So it's volume 1, 2, 3, and 4, I think. Starts with ancient civilizations and moves right up to the Cold War, the current Second World War space. And it's told in story, and then she has books that go along with it for activities. It's lovely. So whatever your approach is to teaching history, you can teach your own country, South African, and you can teach world history. And what's lovely about this is it's not influenced by political ideology of any particular country or time. And also children love the world history because you've got Romans, and you're building shields, and you have spears, and you're acting out these things. It's really lovely. Then in terms of, you get unit study types, like Konos is a unit study. Unit studies are lovely. So if you create your own curriculum from a storybook, you can use a unit study type approach. It's lovely. Their primary language source was lateral learning language arts through literature, and they used Matthew C. predominantly. Then you have, which I think very few people know about, is a project-based learning by Laurie Pickett, and that's for your very, very bright, self-driven children. Project-based learning is based on the Reggio system from Italy. It was post-Second World War, and the children in Italy had very poor education, and this man, Reggio, began to implement this form of education. It's lovely. So children do journal writing, so they will it's, you need space, you need to give them tools, because they will construct, they will build, they will read, they will write, they will journal. And it's you need activity boxes, you need activity stations everywhere for these children. But you can also, the lovely thing is you can take parts of these different styles of learning and you can create your own style with your child in mind. And honestly, when the children are young, you don't have to worry about, are they going to pass? Are they, like Wendy will say, if you do footprints, you're way above CAPS. Promise you, even though it doesn't look like CAPS, what you're learning exceeds the requirements of CAPS. So you don't want this guy on your shoulder always going at you, you know, making you feel guilty. You must not do that. You know, you must have confidence in what you're doing. So then it's lovely to, even whatever you're doing, is to have activity boxes for your children to access. So you can have an art box where they've got all the tools that they need to do art. You've got a box of construction, so if they want to construct, they can. And then when you're teaching habits, they will put it away so it doesn't become a nightmare, you know, because you've got all this stuff all over the place. Then later on, or even younger, finding now, it wasn't available to us then, and it's not something I would use now with younger children personally, but you have online learning, you have Brainline, you have Impact, you have Cambridge from young already. And that's very school-based, you know, it's like school at home, nothing's really changed. You're writing exams, you know, it's external exams, and the children just get so stressed, you know, really, it's there. And then later on, when children are high school and they need in a proper accreditation, you can do Cambridge, you can do GED, because I would advise you to look to having a proper accreditation when they finish matric. I think it's important. It just makes it easier for them to access jobs and further learning. You also have a Kairos, it's a credit-based system, so they are in South Africa. You have a South African branch and you have OC, so all of that you will, and I think it's from grade 10, 11, 12. So they would say work through a particular maths book or science book and gain a credit for that. So you're required to gain X amount of credits, but there's quite a lot of liberty in that. So you don't have to write external exams if your child is petrified, doesn't cope with exams, and they will get a matric accreditation, which is lovely. It's a lovely option. But that's more when they're older. And like I said earlier, you can use different resources and build your own scheme of work. And I would really encourage you as parents to prepare. It's important. So what I did was around September, I would begin to prepare for the following year. So I will have a broad scheme of work. What are we going to cover for the year? So you start with that and then you break it down. How do I set up my terms? You don't have to follow the school terms. You can use it as a guide, and I would suggest you do. You can maybe, which worked for me, was to work a 5-6 week, 1 week off, especially if it wasn't major holidays, because it gets really intense. You get tired, you've got things happening at home, you've got to do stuff. So if you're doing like a 5 week on, 1 week off, or you're doing a full term, or you're doing a 3-term approach, or you're doing a 4-term approach, that's up to you. You adapt, you do what works for your family. So, but it's important that you prepare. So then you begin to prepare, you look at your terms, then you break it down to your weeks. Okay, this is what I want to accomplish in a week. We're going to do maths every day, we're going to do language every day, we're going to do science once a week, we're going to do history once a week, whatever it is you choose, but you do need to prepare. It's it just brings you relief because you know where you're going. If it's a reference point for you all the time, it's a guide, you know where you're going. We need, as much as we require children to be accountable to us, we need to be accountable to them. And what you expect from your children, you need to inspect. You can't let them do a pile of work that you never look at. That's not fair. Because then why should I do this? Nobody's looking at it. Why bother? You're not learning, because if you're not picking up where they're going wrong. So you do need to be responsible as a parent in terms of your preparation. Reading for in our home is very, very important. So, and again, children learn to read at different ages. Some really struggle, takes them a long time. Some read very early, but you can read to them, and that's really wonderful. So you build a culture of reading in your home. So your children, maybe 5 or 6, cannot read, but you can read wonderful stories to them. And by reading to them, they begin to hear correct language, correct pronunciation. They become to intuitively understand grammar, because they are reading really good books. They begin to love words, because you're introducing them to beautiful big words, not these little tiny meaningless words. So that you can do. They can't read it. If they're trying to read it, they're so busy with the mechanics of reading, they're not immersed in the story. So a child can grow tremendously just by you reading. So if you really have a bad day and you've done nothing else and you've read, that you've done a good thing. So I would encourage you to read widely. I will not dictate to you what you must do. In terms of your choice of reading matter, that's to your conscience, what you choose to do. But we read widely, deeply, and we just discuss these books. My children have developed there's certain genre that they enjoy, and they all enjoy different genres, and they all enjoy. But you allow them to develop their own love of reading. Another thing that you can do, especially when you've got multiple ages and they're still very young, you can do what is called morning time. So you can do all your reading, your narrating. So narration is a big thing with Charlotte Mason, so basically it's comprehension. So if you're reading a particular, then they will narrate back to you. They can draw a picture, or they can just... So you don't prompt it, you try not to, and it doesn't have to be a long thing. All you're wanting from them is to see whether they've comprehended something from the text. They've engaged with it, that's their interpretation of that. You don't correct them. It's what they've seen. And as they grow, that will develop the ability to narrate, and then becomes written narration. So it's really like essay writing, or the start of essay writing, comprehension. So you're not having these boring comprehension exercises that you do at school. It's a lovely way of learning. In that time, you can do poetry reading, you can do songs if you're musical and you want to sing hymns, your children's songs, you can do your prayer time, you can do your Bible reading, all in that time. So it's very relaxed. Children love food. My children are like hobbits, we've been immersed in Lord of the Rings and Narnia, and so we have 11s, we have second tea, second breakfast, whatever, So if your children are sitting and you're reading and they've got their little cup of tea or whatever, and you make it special, and their little whatever biscuit or fruit or whatever, and you're reading, it just creates such a beautiful atmosphere, and they just love it. So I have taught children outside my home, quite a few, who have not been exposed to any form of homeschooling, and I have introduced reading into their lives, and honestly, there's times I cannot stop reading. They just want me to read and read. I've done extra lessons with children for maths. So with maths, I'd say, okay, we'll do half an hour we have. The parents drop. I've got half an hour this child. I'll say the last 10 minutes we'll read. And it just opens their world. So we'll do maths and we'll read like code books at the end, or English, you'll read an English story. I was teaching Afrikaans, you read an Afrikaans. And it just changed their world. Also, when you're reading to a child, don't expect him to sit still in the chair and look at you all the time. A child, especially boys, need to move. And if you're forcing them to sit, they're using all their energy to try and keep themselves still, and they're not listening to you. So if they're lying on the floor and staring out the window, or you give them something to color, or they're building Lego, I promise you they're listening. And the child who at least looks like they're listening, they will tell you what's going on in that story. So don't make it a schoolish time. You want it to be a lovely time where it becomes a highlight of their lives. It's we need to remove psychological views on education and children from the way we teach. We're so influenced by the world. We have no idea and how they think in terms of raising children. Language and maths is very important in my view. Those need to be consistent. So if you're spending, they've kind of researched and say 15 minutes a day, their child will learn. So if you're spending at least, so when your children are small, you want short lessons, because you go on and on and on, they stop listening. You don't want to be going on and on. So you want to captivate their attention. Short 20-minute lesson. We're doing maths, and you changing the type of lesson you're doing, so they don't just zone out because it's just that voice of yours going on forever. So short lessons, consistently, we build with math and language, especially the early days when they're learning to read and write. You can't, okay, I'll do 2 hours on a Monday and an hour on Friday, no more. That doesn't work. Not with language and maths. Your tools in terms of teaching, I use whiteboards. I love whiteboards. I've got massive whiteboards everywhere, and we write everything on the boards. We write lists, we do our work, we display our work, our maths problems. It's a lovely tool. Your stationery supplies are very important for your children. You buy the best you possibly can afford. Your children learn to respect their tools and take care of them. Each child has his own stationery, so they learn personal property, how to take care of their personal property. If they're unable to take care of their own property, they will not take care of your property. They will have no respect for it. So you begin to teach in all these small, simple, everyday ways your children learn certain attitudes. So you make, and for me, every year would be stationery. We buy stationery, so we all got our new stationery, our new crayons, our new kogies, our new pencils, our new everything. When your children draw, please do not give them old photostat paper and they must draw this beautiful. No, you give them the best. If they're doing watercolor, you give them watercolor paper. Especially with art. Art is a huge component of our homeschooling. We would spend Fridays would be art day. It would be art appreciation, music appreciation. So we would listen because we would listen. My daughter was classically trained in music, and we would learn about composers and times of styles of music. And I would often use film scores because they are absolutely beautiful. These scores that are written for these films, and we would listen to them outside of the film, and you're listening to the score and you can just see the story, because orchestral music tells a story, and so you train children's ears to hear music, to identify artists. Artists, of course, you will do age appropriate. You're not going to tell them about their dreadful lives, because some of them were dreadful. They were very a lot of the people you're dealing with, or most of them, are not Christian, so their lives will not reflect a Christian worldview. But their work is beautiful, and they can learn from their work and learn from the time that work was done. And as they get older, you can teach them that style reflected that kind of political view, or that kind of movement of thinking at that time, because they all do. Often art and music is prophetic in terms of the world, where the world is at. Also, like when you do maths, there's nothing worse than having a compass that goes and you can't get your point in, and you can't draw your circle because and your pencil won't stay in. That frustrates a child. You need to have the right tools. You don't need a ruler that you can't read because it's all rubbed off and they can't count 10 centimeters or whatever because the ruler's dreadful, or it's all chipped and they can't draw a decent line. Those kinds of things are very important. So yes, best art supplies, and yes, I think that's pretty much. So in terms of literature, you need to realize that publishers influence the books that are published. So if you had to look at children's literature over a period of time, and you would see a certain type of literature, and you will see as time moves on, we live in a highly secular world, a highly materialistic world. So children's literature became less and less and less of imagination. And it was these really boring books and a sentence would consist of 8 little words. It was just the quality of literature became so bad. So much of our literature that we read was classical children's literature that we read with our children, because the literature, and it's not even the content, it's just the poor quality of the construction of language for children. So you need to keep that in mind, that books are influenced by publishers. So interestingly enough, I was listening to a podcast by Literary Life podcast, and this couple does literature. They teach literature. They're very immersed in that space. They teach Homer and Odyssey and all that kind of stuff. And they were saying that at the moment, the most sought after novels, literature is fantasy. Because it's not, we live in a world where there's no imagination. People do not have, our children do not, their imaginations are not. And if you think about it, we live in space and time, but right here is God. That heaven is here, but our children are unaware of it, because we're not creating a reality of another world that we're going through a door. So when they're reading Narnia and going through a door in a parallel universe, or Lord of the Rings, the imagination is woken, and they can imagine this God who is out there, this heaven and these angels. We live in a world that does not engage with that. So we need to allow our children to engage with imagination in a safe place with good literature, because obviously some bad stuff out there. You don't want them engaging with that kind of literature. So if you are not a home educator, there's still a lot you can do with the children in your life or around you. You can, if there's a child who comes home and there's no parents at home, you can invite them over every day and just read to them. So let's start reading this book. Or you can invest in their stationery if they don't have access to stationery. Or you could go, there's so many ways that you can enrich the lives of children if you're not home educating. Education goes across the board in whichever field you find yourself, wherever you find with your grandchildren, with your children, with your neighbors' children, with your staff, whatever. There's so much opportunity to teach children. Do you have any questions?
Where do you find the time?
If it's a priority, you'll do it. And there's things you obviously give up because you don't have the time to do those things. So I read a lot because I can take a book anywhere. So I'll stand in a queue and read. If the traffic light's a bit long, I might be reading them if I'm really engaged in a book. I take books with me everywhere I read. So that is a joy for me. It's a way of relaxing. I do handwork because I can take it anywhere. If I knit, I can take it anywhere, So I try and do things that I enjoy. So my children need to see that I have my own interests, that I enjoy doing certain things. When your children are small, you are most likely only going to be reading the books they're reading, and that's fine because there simply isn't time for you to be reading anything else, and that's fine because you'll learn from what you're reading to them. So depends where you are in your journey. You will have less or more time to do certain things, and remember, those days go by very, very quickly. So don't burden yourself. Don't think you have to be doing everything right now. You won't be able to. So do what you can, do what is before you, and the time will come when you'll be able to do other things.
Did you ever have to work outside the home and do what you do?
Not with Bezaleel. I did work for a while when my boys were younger. So my 2 older boys went to school, obviously. It was pre-94. they finished, even when I was started homeschooling, they finished school. They went through school, so I know school, and obviously I was in school. I have, when I was schooling my children, I did have a small cottage school, so I was teaching other children alongside my children, so that was a whole different space when you're teaching another child. So I have done that sort of thing, but I've not actually held a job. Moms do. There are a lot of moms that do work, and they just learn, they negotiate around that. They do certain things to make it work. So yes, it's not that you can't work. You can, but then you really got to be organized, and you need a community around you, either family or friends that will support you and help you. And remember, this journey is not a journey that you're on your own. I would encourage you, if you home educate, to build small groups where you meet together. Encourage one another, share resources, share what you've learned. I would encourage you to have outings with your children. So as groups of families, you take all your children out somewhere. It can be a really big outing, or it can just be a little outing. So we've done things, dairy farms, bee places, we've been to museums, and we've just been to a restaurant, or we've just been to a park. But then you bring the children together with other families and other children. So then their community is a little bit bigger, and you're bearing the burden with other homeschool families. I'm very careful not to judge teachers. They have a tremendously difficult job. They are in the system, they have 30 children, they have no say over this. So I respect them. I understand that some are poorly trained. You get good teachers and you get bad teachers, either in government schools or private schools. You get good homeschoolers and you get bad homeschoolers. So I have empathy for teachers, because I know how difficult it is, how they are trapped in the system and they have to work through that. And to try and do things any different is very difficult because of the amount of children. But yes, it can work.
What role did your husband play?
So my husband never taught my children. Some families, the husbands are very involved. But Alan is our IT man, so especially at my children's age now, they all have laptops. We got to a point where we did all our studies online. Alan kept us connected. He kept our computers running. Anything repairs, upgrades, whatever, he does that. And also he's Uber dad, so he relieves a lot of that burden for me so that I can have the time to be at home to teach. So very involved in that way and supportive, not against what I was doing, but not hands-on involved, no. But some dads are.
I'm just thinking, Sue, about the other day when we were at your place and your bearings went on the...
Yes, yeah.
So Alan's stripping the car and Tim was with him. So it's
Yeah.
an education
Yes,
thing that's
yes.
just a very natural part of the environment
Yes.
that you work in. It's not like, okay, now get your book out, we're going to do this. So it's just a natural way of learning, hands-on.
Yes, and a lot of his computer skills is passed on to the kids. They know a lot about computers, hardware, software, uploading programs, very with it in terms of that, yeah. He's busy doing 3D, he's got 3D printers. So he's in this whole, he's still learning, he's 17, he's learning to program 3D printers, and he's producing things, and Lizzie's painting them for him, and yeah, so he's in this growth mindset where he's keeping his mind engaged, he's doing what he can, and then the children see that, they're seeing he's trying. At 70-year-old, you are programming a 3D printer to produce something. It's quite astonishing actually what he can produce. And he does practical things. He said, okay, your brooms are always lying there. I'll make you like little things you can hang your brooms up. So he makes it on the 3D printer. It's like a little thing. It's got a little gear, and then you just hook your broom in there. It's hanging on the wall. So he does those kind of things for us. So the house we're in at the moment, we have no dining room. Our dining room is on the patio, so when it rains, the legs get wet and it's wood and it gets messy. So he made like little container things to put the legs in, so when it rains the feet don't get wet. So made it from 3D printing. So all those kinds of things. It's been entrepreneurial, it's been innovative. You do all this sort of thing.
Did he work from home?
Yes, not in the early days, but later on. So he had a Wi-Fi business where he provided Wi-Fi connectivity, but then cable came. What is it called? Fiber. And that ended the business, because then fiber was just being put in. But he certainly learned a lot. I mean, when computers first came in, it was something none of us our age knew or had, and he got an old computer, and my 2 older boys were in primary school, and they stripped and they programmed, and he taught them just by learning himself.
What I noticed whenever I visited Sue was the joy that was in their educational environment. It wasn't like school.
No, it's not.
So we'd go for walks and there'd be a butterfly on the bush, and all the kids were like, "Mum, look!" And they were so enthusiastic about this little butterfly. And then they'd go home and research it, and it became such a lovely natural way of teaching, which I was many times when you were doing your education, I was like, I want to be in this classroom. It was exciting. It wasn't a boring. I mean, I'm sure there's tedious times.
Yes, there is.
Because that's the way it is. But there was such a love to learn and discover, which came from you naturally, that I think you have implanted in your kids. Because like you say, as a teacher you can either go, okay, so we have to do this, guys, sit down, and then that creates that atmosphere for the child. But you always had such delight when you were teaching.
And it's lovely. Nature study is such a lovely tool to do. We draw a lot. Most of our work is illustrated. I don't do book reviews; they're boring. We do our own book reviews. So I would read. So I have had students in the last few years with really learning struggles, medication, just struggles, and they've come into my home and just flourished, and it's been so wonderful to see it. And this one particular child I had in the last few years before we moved, she had been in about 5 private schools, just struggling, and she came incredibly autistic. Build little models with paper, build a whole house with furniture, and I used that. So when we did, for example, when we did essay writing, I would print off cartoon strips. You can get them there. It's lovely what you can get with bubbles. And she would create her own story just from the cartoon. And then I'd say, okay, create your own cartoon. And she would draw, because she drew beautifully, and she'd draw these, and she would do her own story where she would have struggled in doing a formal type of an essay. She came in, she wanted me to teach her to knit, to crochet, to sew, and I did. And it's so unusual in a child from a very secular home, no Christian influence at all. And we did these. I was always printing things off for her. Art was a huge component. And she just grew, and then her family moved to Scotland, and the UK education is a year ahead of us. We kind of, they start school earlier. She was already behind. And then when she went into the UK, she went into high school. 900 kids in the school from our home to 900 children. She was already behind there. She was behind in the Scottish system. And she won the best literature award in her class regularly. And it was amazing. And she would say to her mum, "Ma'am taught me more than they teach me in a day at the high school." And we weren't pressured by any means. We taught from 8 to 1. We had tea time, we had lunch time, we had reading time. Friday was art, and this child just flourished. She just learned. It was such a blessing. I had a little girl from the township. She would travel like half an hour, 3/4 an hour in a taxi to get to me from where she was. So she's getting up early. Gogo's getting up, getting her dressed. She would come. I said, okay, You can sleep on the couch for half an hour until you feel better, and then she'll wake up, she'll be refreshed. That child flew in her reading. She was in a private school and they said she can't read, we can't have her in the school, she must leave the school. Her ability to read is astonishing. She went back into a private school way ahead of her peers. So it's amazing what you can do. And it's not about cramming. It's not about that. It's about a love of learning. We did a lot of science experiment, lots. It's just so exciting. We built circuits, parachutes, all kinds of things. I have 2 books here of a friend of mine whose child I taught. I don't have access to the other children because they're gone. So I've just brought them for you to look at to show you how I do literature-based learning with younger children. So took lots of photos. So from my side, it was a lot of work. I was always printing, photo, compiling the books. These children, this particular child couldn't write. It was one of his problems. So I wrote in his book. I wrote it for him. And they adore these books. He's 15 now, and these books are their prized possession. I was very grateful she let me bring them so that you can have a look. And she'll say to him, "Who was your best teacher?" Auntie Sue, of course. And we had a difficult time. It wasn't an easy road, but he just flourished. It was lovely.
Do you have any thoughts on unschooling?
From the text that I was reading earlier on, I'm not a fan of unschooling because I think from God's point of view, we need wisdom, understanding, we need instruction, we need knowledge. So I think we do have a responsibility to grow our children, but there is definitely a place for, if you've been in a school system and you bring a child out of school, it's a wise thing to have 6 months of just unschooling because you're really just in a mindset and a way of behaving and thinking, and then just doing fun things. But I think we have a responsibility because often if you read the book of Proverbs, I would encourage you to read the book of Proverbs because you'll get a really good sense of God's view on knowledge and our role as parents in instructing our children. So I would encourage not the serious school type formal learning, definitely not. Our learning looks very different, but we are learning. And it's not a cram day. So like the Charlotte Mason kind of philosophy is you do your academics, as it were, in the morning. So they had very short lessons and very short days. So the morning they do their maths and their language and their whatever. But the afternoon, no homework. So there's no homework, there's no finishing maths in the afternoon. And the maths was given over to time for craft, for cooking, for free time, music, instruments, whatever. And also to discourage excessive extramural activities. It's exhausting for a child. So you don't want to fill them with 100 activities and going to soccer, going to music, and going to jogging, and you don't want to do that. You can introduce them to certain extracurricular, and if they really take it, go for it, then you run with that one. Maybe it runs for a year or two, whatever, and then then you go with that one. But try not to be in a car all afternoon taking them everywhere, and think you're compensating somehow by doing that. You're not.
Now ask for your best tips on dealing with that age and sit down math for that age.
I would focus on her. And just be so you would want her to be doing her maths. And then you would occupy that little one on your lap or a sibling but you can do it in your arms and teach her maths, but don't let her lose out because of a younger sibling. I think it's important. With my children, because some of my children really struggled with the times table. So Rosie was their teacher, so you can imagine how that went. So it was so she would have, you guys, how did she teach you the times tables? So when they were little. And she's just a few years older, but she was good with maths. She has very good memory. And then she would drill them on their times tables. And then Rosie was Ben's read buddy reader. Hey, so Ben struggled to read. Eyesight. He had his teeth, because he used to suck his fingers, so his teeth grew that way. So he wasn't formulating sound correctly because his tongue wasn't touching his teeth. So it affected all his reading, and I felt really bad because I didn't kind of discover that a bit later. But Rosie was his reading buddy, so she would sit with him and read with him. So you can utilize your children that way. And so your children can assist one another in those kinds of situations. But yeah, it's difficult, but yeah, it can be done. Yeah, we had a huge age range. So I taught kind of in groups. I had my older group and then this group kind of. I had the two major groups that I was teaching. Yeah. And children learn through play, so you don't need to worry too much. Make things available. I know with baby it's not easy. My daughter-in-law now has 4. She's in the UK. The oldest is 8 and the youngest is 6 months, I think. Yeah, so it's a challenge. Make no mistake. But you can do it. And again, it doesn't have to be long. Maybe long less. Just consistently.
I don't know, what's the homeschooling situation like here as far as encouraging each other, like groups of you getting together?
It's very fractured.
Is it?
Yeah, it's more a status symbol. I think there's the rich ones and then there's
Not so rich.
Us, the rest of us.
The small groups can be small, and that's something Leondad from the Pestalozzi Trust. I don't know if any of you, he's died a number of years ago, but he was one of the pioneers of home education in South Africa. Do you know him? Do you know of him? Pestalozzi Trust?
I want to ask a question about this.
Okay. And he encouraged very much, he encouraged mothers to be in groups, small groups, like a home cell, 4 or 5 of you. It doesn't have to be massive. You're like-minded, you do things together. You can do an art day together. Maybe you want to do a particular project. Do they call them, what do they call them? Forget it now. But you can come together and do a particular topic or an activity, or you can go somewhere, or you can just go to a picnic, but you're out and you're together. It just breaks. So what we did is we would, so you would want to have a highlight at the end of your term, even with my children and with the children that I was teaching alongside. So the end of our term we would go to the Milky Way and we would have ice cream and it's just so they just love it, it's just a memory. You can do small things like that. You can pack sandwiches and go and kick a ball in the park or something. It doesn't have to be anything, status oriented.
So about Pestalozzi, obviously on a lot of Facebook groups and things about homeschooling, and I've had so many people saying that it's actually just a waste of time to be part of Pestalozzi. It's a waste of money because, when it comes down to it, if legal charges are put against you or whatever, you actually, Pestalozzi doesn't really, they don't put their money where their mouth is.
Okay.
Have you been part of the Pestalozzi Trust?
I was part of the trust from the beginning because I had foster children, because our situation, we were already linked to government. Government was aware of us. So I wanted some kind of protection for my children. At the time with Leondad and Karen, and as a pioneer type of organization, was very good. So I paid all the years for Pestalozzi. I don't know what they like now, so I can't speak to it. I never registered, ever, with the Department of Education, ever. And I home educated for 15, 16 years. But then things are different now. So when we started, it was very new. Legislation wasn't formulated. They were still looking at it. They just made homeschooling legal. They were busy trying to establish the government education. So they really were not interested in you. You were not their focus. So, but now they are busy formulating the Bella Bills, so they're busy putting things into place. So it's different. But I don't want you to be anxious about that. Don't let it make you afraid. I think our new Minister of Education, I'm not sure what her name is, has delayed the Bella Bill, which is amazing. Because if you think of how much prayer has gone into that, so they were busy putting it through, and she said, "No, I want to relook at this." And it's not even about the issue of homeschool; it's about the other issues that she wants to talk about in this. So that's wonderful, you know. So I think just keep your head down, you know. See how long you can go. They're not going to. You need to remember that they have no right to enter your home. If they come to you, said, "We can go to the coffee shop and I'll talk to you." They do not have any constitutional right to enter your home. So, and I know it's very intimidating, it's very fearful because it's your children and they're going to take them away from me. But don't be. Just say, be polite always, be respectful always. Try and win them on your side. Don't be antagonistic, and be gracious. Ask questions. Go to a neutral venue and just win them, you know, and if at one point you need to comply, then we need to comply. But we know in the States, they've been able to, homeschoolers have worked with those particular requirements and have done really well. So we just need to be creative and not fearful. And trust God, pray. Because it's amazing how He'll make a way for you, you know, and just protect you. So I can't say if our page, I never needed them. I also, when I started cottage school, because I was still educating my own children, I started a cottage school. I actually registered with them as a cottage school. A cottage school is not legal in South Africa. So all the cottage schools out there are not legal. But they meet a need on the ground level. It's grassroots. It's so important because their children would never be reached otherwise. So you just get on with the job. But the Pestalozzi Trust will bring some kind of advice or protection or negotiation or dialogue into that space. But they will tell you very clearly this is not a legal option. I think you need about 20 children minimum to register for a school, I think. And the registration process is enormous. Costly.
So were there particular types of cases that the Pestalozzi Trust would focus on to the negation of others? You know, when it came to going to court and fighting something, would they more go with certain types of cases and focus on those?
I think their primary role was in terms of legislation. So they would engage with government concerning the rights of the homeschooler generally. So a lot of their money and their time was spent in that space. So they would go in. So like with the Bella Bill, they were in meetings all the time, and they were getting parents to contribute to the conversation, to bring it to. So obviously they cost money because you've got advocates representing the homeschool community as a whole. I don't know how many individuals they've really had to represent. I'm not sure. I don't know of any. In the very early days, I think a family was imprisoned, very early days, but it was for a short time. And not since, you know, no parent has been. And also you need to understand that when the government talks about children in school, you know, we get so focused on ourselves, we think, oh, they're targeting the homeschool community. Actually, they're not. They're worried about the mom in the corner sitting with her child. Why is their child not in school? Why is she sitting begging with their child? They're looking at rural situations where children are not accessing education. So a lot of their focus is is trying to make education available to all the children in South Africa. It's not about us, you know, very often it's not.
So you don't recommend registering with the...
I would recommend, unless you have actual proof that they're doing something incorrectly. Oh, no. No, I can't tell you that because I might be inciting you to break the law or something. But I wouldn't be concerned. Wait until it's not in law at the moment. The billable is not in the law.
And once you registered, you're on their radar.
Yeah. Yes. So no, don't worry about registering. No. Because you actually don't need to be registered to actually pursue further education, Cambridge or GED. You don't need to show that I'm actually registered with it. You don't. And remember that according to law, your children's only required to be in the system till grade 9, 15, I think. After that, they're not required by law to be in school.
The problem is you've got to get them to 15.
Hurry up, let's get to 15.
How did you go about providing reports?
I think it's a good idea to do that in hindsight, because you don't know how the playing field changes, because honestly it's changed and changed and changed. And if you're wanting to do a credit system, they will require some record keeping from you. So for me, part of record keeping is actually their work. And because often, we're doing oral work with our children, especially, and we're not keeping record, but you can actually. So just maybe you have a diary, and you just, especially when they're younger, just putting in main points of study, or I'm using this particular curriculum or this particular maths or this. You don't have to, every day we did 5 sums or we did 2 books, or you don't have to do that, but you're giving. So when you look at it, oh yes, I did that with the children.
What I'm actually getting at is when they go to school at the end of the year.
Oh, reports.
Report,
No.
yes.
You know your child. See, that's the difference. You're working with your child every day. You know he can't do that particular maths problem. You don't need to do a test to find that out. So no, that's not necessary. What I did do with my children as they got older, we would have presentation days. So we would do a particular topic. So for example, I think Lizzie did, who did what's this, Hammurabi, that big art thing, with the,
That was Lizzie.
yes. So we would do things, a particular topic, and then they would need to present this topic. So that was quite a thing. So they would spend a lot of time, and then we would sit down as a family, and then they would have to present it. So it actually prepares them for work in real life, because when you need to present, you know how to. So they have to stand up, they need to articulate, they need to explain their work, they display their work. So we used to do that, and that was quite fun. And they all would have their own topic, but that would be older, but you can do it when they're younger. So poetry is a very helpful tool with children when they're small, to learn a poem, and then they stand and present the poem to the family or to their grandparents, and you teach them to project their voice, to stand correct, to make eye contact, and they learn real life skills doing that. They learn not to be shy when they're presenting something to a group of people. You can do that sort of thing to prepare them. But yeah, I think it's very important to mark maths, but you're marking it, and you can test maths if you want to, but it's not for a report purpose. It's just to see how they're going. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? If you've got a child that's acing the maths, why mark it?
Sorry, why mark?
Why mark it if you know that it is 100% correct?
How do you know?
Because I watch him doing it. So I know that the sum is correct.
I think
So that's what I'm asking.
Oh.
I know that there's no error on that page.
okay.
All right. So my question is, why mark it? I'm just wanting why are you marking maths?
Well,
I know that it's 100% correct, and he knows it's 100% correct.
Well, you have marked it.
yes. Yes, you have seen it, you have looked at it, you have determined that problem is correct. So you have, in that sense, I'm not meaning like in a formal sense. You can, where you're ticking off. Those kind of little things don't bother me. They're like whether I'm using a red pen and I'm breaking this child down because he's got these red marks on his page. I'm not into that sort of thing. I mark the work, and then because I have multiple children that I'm working with, and my children are engaging with their maths on different levels. So what I do, especially I suppose I've always done it, so I'll mark work and then I'll say, okay, you go and redo it. If you don't know what you're doing, I'll do it on the board, we'll do it together. And then we engage as a group and then we'll do it together. So the point is to gain understanding, to gain knowledge. But if they've got it right, that's great. But then they can help a child who doesn't know how to, because often a child who teaches a child maths seems to have a greater impact on their child than you do. Because I think often we just assume they know things, and we have gaps in our explanation of maths where a child is more capable. But yeah, you are actually observing what they're doing and you are actually seeing if it's correct. And there will come a time where they'll struggle. They'll come across concepts that will be difficult.
You get a concept. No, we have. We've had concepts where we've had to physically work our way around the concept.
Yes.
But once you've got the concept,
It's lovely. It's wonderful. It's a blessing.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And you can find the error quite quickly.
Yes.
In the new concept.
Yes.
Because at the moment he's teaching his brothers to add.
Yeah.
And it's like parrot fashion in my house.
Yes.
These numbers going
Lovely.
over the house
Lovely.
the whole time.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to remember, I know that a lot of the schools have a new form of maths where they're not teaching times tables. They're not teaching bonds. The children must discover it in there. That's silly, really. Because when you get to algebra and you cannot multiply, you will never cope with those algebra problems because you're still trying to figure out how to multiply and you're trying to figure out fractions. A lot of children that I've come across in school settings, when they hit fractions, they just don't cope. I have grade 8 children coming to me from a school and they want to do, but they can't do fractions. I said, you'll never do fractions. You'll never do algebra if you can't do your fractions, if you cannot multiply. And you'll find that in your maths, as you move on, the most important skills is multiplication, fractions, percentages, decimals, because that plays into further study, graphing, algebra, geometry, etc. Yeah. So, and also it just keeps you engaged with the maths, so you learning or you filling your gaps. And also, child is seen. Your children need to be seen. They need to know that you affirm their work, you affirm their efforts, whether they're bright and get it all right or they don't.